IEC is hosting, of course, day one of the e-voting conference. There's a media briefing on the sidelines of that. Speaking now is the chair of the IEC, Mosotho. Let's listen in.
Most importantly, it's not just a discussion for a select few. It's a discussion for the whole nation. We need to have policymakers, engage in the discussion. You heard the minister talk about what the future of an identity might look like in the country. These are parts of the discussions that are very, very necessary at this point. And so we don't want to leave anybody behind. We also don't want to say to you, this is a discussion we have in the Political Liaison Committee. It doesn't end there. It goes far beyond that reality. There are implications for young persons in particular, because you're asking about them. When we looked at online voting, and now with hindsight, we know what it has done. It has given us access to more young people than we had previously. E-voting, however we conceptualize it in our country, must help us deal with the challenges we have. We don't want it for the sake of it. We want it to deal with those tough questions we have not been able to break hitherto. I need to deal with the trust and integrity. It's an important issue, as you know, in South Africa. An election not only deals with reality, a lot of it must address perception as well, because trust is a currency in the work that we do as the IEC. And it goes with what South Africans how they will behave when they have been confronted by a situation and they believe in how we dealt with it. And we put our cards on the table and deal with the issues very directly. So it is not a matter that we think it's short term. We don't think, clearly, even if we come with a unanimous voice that says, man, let's run, tomorrow is the day to do it. We will have to look at the that issue realistically. We have not, as we discuss here, we don't have every piece of legislation that is necessary to deal with this, as an example. But we'll begin to understand what needs to be done to put the necessary legislation in place, to have people debate that, and to ensure that when it goes through the process, it is a thing that carries the mandate of our people as a nation, not just that of the Electoral Commission, the IEC, or that of a selected number of people who are in Cape Town, but of this nation. Cost, and I want to think of it as an investment rather. An investment we would need to make here is very clearly not going to be an insignificant consideration. It will be. But even more importantly, it must be an investment justifiable in what it promises to deliver to the people of this nation. It's not just a question of saving 90 million ballot papers that we printed and distributed. It must enable people to vote, to participate in our electoral democracy. This franchise is important. There are certain things we may be limited at the moment because of the current configuration. But I imagine if we were able to go to a voting station and you identify yourself as you would require to be identified, the minister touched on the possibilities. It would then say, you are in Cape Town, but you're actually voting for a voting station in Kwanyamazana, in Mpumalanga, and place your ballot right there. We possibly then don't need a Section 24A to say, you're not going to be in your station And so we can be a little more flexible. We can make the franchise even more open for persons to exercise, other than limiting them where they are. And the limitation, understandably today, is because we have to balance trust and practicality with being frivolous and therefore impacting an election outcome. These are things that when we have a clear appreciation and the mandate is on the table, we'll be able to justify. Everyone will see what this investment ought to give us, and we won't need to tell everyone we have delivered on that, cost efficiency or not. You will tell us if we have done. And so these are the discussions we have. The last thing is the timing. Timing is very important. These discussions have begun. We believe that they will lead to things we can eventually put down onto a green paper, have a discussion on it, and that green paper graduates to a point where a piece of legislation is in place, and we certainly limit our choices to the choices that are available and we can implement. But I can tell you, it is not a matter we are going to do in time for 2026. It may not be in time for 2029. It is work at that point that is going to require that we look at how best do we implement. Do we run parallel processes to engender confidence in this work? Do we let people play with these tools to be sure that these are not dangerous things to do, but they're real things and they can see the outcome. It is when we have that process and we have built that confidence that we can then say South Africa will go. So those timelines will become a little clearer as we do that. But now let us ensure that we speak about this in our homes, in our areas of work. We give feedback to our institution, to everyone else, and we help educate one another. I may have missed out some things that you have raised, and I'm looking at the CEO and my colleagues if there's something I have missed as I invite the Minister on anything on the last two questions that we have dealt with.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, is it still morning, to the colleagues from the press. Thank you for the questions. I just want to really make one addition to what the Chair has said, maybe on the big picture, because the IEC, I think, is clearly embarking on a process here. But this comes at a very important moment as well. So it goes to the timing question. I spoke about the reforms that we are pursuing in the Home Affairs ecosystem, which will have implications for the IEC, whether this discussion is happening today or not. In other words, to make it concrete, how will the IEC register or allow a person to vote when they show up with a digital ID rather than a card or an ID book? So those are already questions that will necessarily come from the work that's going on in the broader ecosystem. So I think it is therefore the perfect moment, and it's by coincidence that we've really found this sweet spot to have this discussion based on the research that the Commission has done and based on the discussions that came many years prior that all now inform where we are today. But I would go a step further and say, as far as I'm concerned, every government institution should be having this discussion. And that's where I think the IEC is correct. And the reason I say that is because the line of the direction of travel is very clear. The President's announcements at the State of the Nation address were built around the introduction of digital identity and the advantages that unlocks for service delivery. And so it is incumbent upon all of us now to think through, what does this mean in our particular space? How do we mitigate risk? And most importantly, how do we make sure that we can reap the benefits of the reforms that are now underway? And so I think what will happen over time, and yes, of course, this won't be overnight, but certainly by the end of this administration, Home Affairs wants to deliver digital ID, wants to make sure that South Africans all have access to a smart ID, want to make sure that we've decentralized our services to massively improve access. And by the time we get there, I think the discussion is going to be a little different. The discussion may well be which institutions failed to seize the opportunity, which institutions failed to think big picture about what a more digital approach to government actually means for them. That's not about the IEC or about any specific organization. It is now a cross-cutting priority that we all need to really get on board with. And so I think investing now in the kind of conversations that the Chair has highlighted will stand the institution in good stead going forward. It will stand any institution in good stead to really explore this now. And I say so from my own perspective, seeing how the Department of Home Affairs, how the Border Management Authority, how the government printing works are grappling with similar questions. They have a different mandate, of course. But what does it actually mean for us in practical terms that we are now heading in this direction? And therefore, I'm really encouraged that the IEC in their space is confronting this, is really interrogating it, and make sure that they, within the broader ecosystem, are able to find their way forward, but also then contribute to that priority that the President has outlined, and that I think is slowly coming about in various spaces. So I think you can't really go wrong by investing properly in examining what this means for an institution at the heart of our democracy at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'm going to take two last questions before we get back to plenary. One question here and then two at the back. Let's start.
My name is Just very one. First, I think takeaways, particularly from the Minister's presentation, I think the takeaway from the conference, because I think I like the notion that there is a difference between the digital transformation versus digitization, which ultimately is about providing the services much more efficiently, much more reliably, much more accurately, which is what I think and understand that's what IEC is now trying to do with this concept, which logically means that one would expect that it is going to expand the voter turnout. But one would think, how do you respond to someone who says, look, it could expand, but because of the nature of our country, is it not necessarily going to favor the young and urban voter and continue to keep the rural and the elderly voters further marginalized, because those are the challenges that we are currently having in the country. But also in the rural areas with issues of connectivity, which get worsened with the issue of load shedding that is just refusing to go away, with power goals of connectivity to bring all of those challenges. Of course, I don't want to have learned that I must not limit the issue of e-voting to online voting, because there are other platforms as well. But the current challenges we have now with voting is that the rural voters, because of population sizes and how the issue of the ward demarcation is done, that is that we have a vast area in one areas compared to the areas where some voter might have to travel 10 to 20 kilometers to get to the voting station. But that work alone, the IEC seems to have left it to political parties to get the people to go and vote, as opposed to the IEC themselves taking. So how does the IEC now mitigate against those issues and make sure that even those people who might not necessarily have easy access to data, to connectivity, for economic reasons, but also for rural infrastructure reasons, how do you mitigate against those things and make sure that this does not leave anyone behind? Because I think one takeaway we can do, because one must think if we can get each and every registered voter to go and vote, which I think this is what is going to bring us closer to that, ultimately bring us a true democracy in terms of allowing everyone an opportunity to participate, but given these challenges and the state of our country, how do we then mitigate against those?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, in terms of independent media. Minister, obviously we've seen the recent impact of budget cuts, especially the last election, the impact it had on the IEC. from your side, with those conversations, how do we make sure that we are advocating for the IEC without obviously with needing to weigh the necessary importance of the fiscal responsibility, but then how do you balance that and just make sure that further cuts don't harm the IEC and banks? Because we've seen first that the impact of that further cuts could cause further damage later on.
Yeah. Thanks.
Let me take the last one before we wrap up. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. When we were addressing the you said that you are now working towards full-fledged digital applications by 2029. Given the fact that has been spoken up about a lot of people, especially in the rural areas, and still do not have access to digital data, not familiar with the digital world. Do you think that will be possible to achieve by 2029?
Let me go first.
Okay, thank you so much.
Go first, yeah. Sure. Thank you very much. So, just on that question, I think you're referring to having digital ID by 2029. So, the ability for people to have not only a version of their ID on a smart device, but also to be able to use that to then verify who they are. And that really is the big picture of what digital ID can offer us. And in that process then, by having one secure central verification system that is based on biometrics, in other words, facial recognition or fingerprint, you can then plug government services into that so that you are able to bring those services online, but also, even if someone still goes to a SASA point to register, that they use this centrally secured, verified system to combat fraud and make sure that people are who they say they are. So that's really the space that digital ID can bring us to. Now, you mention issues of the digital divide. And I want to really emphasize this point from a Home Affairs perspective. This isn't an IEC question, it's a Home Affairs question. Home Affairs at the moment is resource constrained, like many government departments, of course. And we understand that reality. We're not kicking against it. We understand we have to operate within that reality. And in an environment of such fiscal constraint, it makes no sense that we spend so much of our resources dealing with routine cases where someone needs to renew an ID, where someone needs to go and collect a document. Now, what happens there is that it means that someone who could have used an app to order their new document, if it was through a digital system, or someone who could have gone to a bank branch, they are now standing in a queue. They are adding to the volume. And that holds us back from actually serving people who need it the most. So if we succeed in our mission to get smart IDs available across the country by leveraging what is already a very successful pilot project where you can get your smart ID through a bank branch, if we can get into every bank branch or into hundreds of bank branches, we are going to basically spread the load to such an extent that queues get shorter at Home Affairs, because you'll have people having options going to other places for these routine transactions. If we introduce delivery of documents, there will be people who would be actually willing to pay to have the document delivered. It takes them out of the queue. They don't go and stand in front of someone who woke up at 5 in the morning and has to travel all day to get there. We get them out of the system. And the whole principle behind this is to then effectively leverage those people who are digital natives or who use this technology easily to get them out of clogging up the system. Because then Home Affairs can finally do some of the really urgent and difficult work that I think it's...
All right, line officials there coming from the Cape Town International Convention Centre. Dr. Leon Schreiber, the Home Affairs Minister, speaking on the sidelines of day 1 of 3 of the e-voting conference, which is being held by the IEC. He's responding, of course, to questions around the digital divide, as both the IEC and Home Affairs work, of course, to digitize and digitalize the process of voting in the country. Interesting remarks from the IEC itself, by the way, saying that if this were to happen, it's definitely not going to be for the local government elections next year, and certainly perhaps not for the 2029 elections, but thereafter.